Welcome. We're nearing the end of Transform. I think this is the second. We have one more session in this room after this, and there's a couple more, some of the various stages. So I hope you guys have all gotten a great deal out of this and are still wide awake and hanging with us here. We're tackling a really broad topic, and it's a nuanced topic. Scaling and standardization. It almost feels ridiculous to try to have that conversation in any sort of limited capacity, right? Because it's this ongoing conversation. It's deep, it's wide, it's variegated, right? But I want to start just by thinking about, what is the goal of standardizing? What are we really talking about when we're talking about standardizing in AI, and what we're talking about when we say scaling? Maybe just going to help us kind of start with that framework.
Yeah, I could start it off. So the first thing is we have this terminology we call incidental complexity within Airbnb, which is just if it's been solved once, we don't really need to solve it over and over again. And so standardization is really getting to a point where we can make sure that if a problem is solved within the company, there aren't different businesses, there aren't different individuals who are looking to solve that same problem and fall with the same pitfalls and kind of spend cycles trying to fix that problem over and over again. So standardization, to at least us, basically means how do we make sure that we standardize to make sure that people have this common framework, common platform, where we don't need to make sure that we're spending cycles on the same problems over and over again.
Yeah, so I guess with any standardization, it's the same things, right? We want to make it predictable, which means that we know how things are going to be done. Each time you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Right, reliable, which means you know that there are certain standards of quality and certain checks and balances to make sure things work correctly, and then efficiency, right? You don't want to keep doing the same things as to what he was saying. You don't want to do those things. For us in the enterprise space, there is the other side as well, which is the interoperability, which is you want to make it work in a way where you can work with several different enterprises and also with several different kinds of systems that these enterprises might have. So that's the other thing that we focus on when we look at standardization in machine learning.
Right, it's a big challenge, right? You have to maintain flexibility. Can you speak to the challenge of maintaining flexibility as you're trying to solve these problems in a broad way?
Yeah, so some of the challenges with maintaining flexibility while standardizing is one of the cons of standardization is you end up losing some of that flexibility where people can build something completely and drastically new. And so one of the kind of challenges that we face at Airbnb is how do we make sure that we have that flexibility while still making sure that some of the common practices are standardized so that you have that predictable performance, that reliability, and making sure that that efficiency is there so we don't have to keep redoing the same things and reinvent the same wheel. And so it's a common struggle that we've had where we're looking to make sure that we have that balance where ML AI is very dynamic. It's advancing very quickly. There's new frameworks coming out. There's new white papers that come out for different ways to do things. So how do we make sure that we imbue our business with the flexibility so that we can pursue these opportunities while still making sure we standardize enough to make those gains from that efficiency from standardization?
Yeah, so the trade-off is always between ease of use and flexibility, right? So, and there's a diversity in terms of what you can do in ML, whether it's the kinds of data that you get to work with, the number of ML frameworks, whether you're using Python or whether you're using Scala, whether you're deploying it in a real-time environment or a batch environment. There's a whole set of diversity of things. And you want to standardize, but also you want to make sure that at the end it solves the use cases that's meant to. Like if there are latency requirements, there are scale requirements, you can't go just because it's standardized, people are not going to deploy it if it doesn't meet those requirements. So there's a whole set of thought which goes into making these standardized. I think you can't just standardize for the sake of standardizing.
Right. So that has to be a goal in mind, right?
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny thinking of the term of flexibility in this case, kind of two meanings, right? On the one hand, you want to make sure your tools aren't preventing you from accomplishing something, but also, as you said, there's the number of scholarly papers that come out every day. I think it's increased tenfold in the last 2 or 3 years, just as a pace. right? So you go to the trouble of sort of figuring out this process, and then the next week there could be a new idea that sort of sort of challenges that. Has that ever happened to? I'm putting you guys on the spot. Has that ever happened to either of you, where suddenly there's this new idea and you're like, I have to go back and rethink how we were doing this. Now we can do it better, or now we need to do it differently, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it hasn't happened as much with us. We've taken an approach where we're really agnostic to different machine learning frameworks. And so there's TensorFlow, there's PyTorch, there's MXNet, a suite of different frameworks out there. And we aren't really prescriptive internally within the company on what framework you should leverage, what framework to use. And so we are able to still allow for that flexibility for people to pursue these type of problems. We just want to make sure that a lot of the common infrastructure, because infrastructure is very similar throughout in terms of whether it's online, offline, latency requirements, scalability. These are challenges that have existed for years and years and years within the technology space. And so a lot of the improvements you can do there, we are fairly confident that these type of challenges, technological challenges, still exist, and these can make headway and we can solve it. For the ML side, we try to keep it very flexible so that as new innovation happens, we allow at least the employees of Airbnb to be able to pursue it without any type of limitation. And so this was actually, if I really think back, this is kind of our second iteration at it. Our first iteration, we were a little bit too freeform. I would say we were the complete opposite of standardization. And that led to a whole suite of difficulties where we're trying to manage just a free-form solutions throughout the company. And that becomes very, very difficult to make those efficiency gains. But yeah, so I think for us at Airbnb, we haven't seen as much struggle with the new white papers coming out because we are trying to be as unopinionated as possible. We try to make sure that it's very, very flexible for our users. I think that was a decision that was made upfront, and that's something that we were able to at least take advantage of.
Yeah, at Adobe, we have been doing machine learning AI for many, many years. So we have a lot of legacy stuff in some sense, which we have built over a period of time. And this field has been evolving very, very rapidly, right? So the latest thing, for example, that we have to think through in terms of standardization is in the area of fairness, accountability, transparency. Like how do you make explainable models? There's a lot of now effort put against can you standardize it across the different applications and AI models that we are delivering to our customers. So yeah, that would be an example that comes to the top of my head. But it's an ongoing process. I think new things are constantly evolving, and this field especially, you have to keep adapting to what's happening, both in terms of the technology as well as the external regulatory and other things that are coming up, like GDPR, for example, is a big area for us as well, in which we have to understand what data can and cannot be used for modeling versus not.
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of come back around sort of a couple of times to this idea of having a goal in mind, right? It's not just a simple matter of let's do it. And you've just listed a number of important goals, right? You're essentially trying to reduce chaos as you're trying to deploy this work, right? You've got compliance concerns, you've got infrastructure concerns, and just really business cases, right? Where you've got you have things you have to solve. And Andrew, you mentioned one of the things that is worth standardizing is sort of these frameworks and infrastructure. What else needs to be standardized? I mean, if you have a checklist of things like we got to attack this and make sure that this is a standardized thing so that we can work with it, aside from infrastructure.
Yeah, so I think something that's getting more and more notice and more focus is how do you standardize the features, the data? Because as you're building these models that are leveraging different types of features, and as people are trying to leverage these features as well, there needs to be standardization to actually know exactly what these features encompass. And so we find that a lot of that standardization in terms of features and data is happening more and more at Airbnb, where we want to make sure that there is this type of standardization so people aren't redefining what a user is over and over in different use cases, and it becomes impossible to actually start interfacing between different types of models and different businesses together. And so the standardize of the data is tremendously important for ML, especially because ML is such at that downstream of the upstream infrastructure and the data and all of that. And that needs to be standardized at a point so that you can build these robust ML models that can serve production traffic and hit the different requirements you need.
Yeah. And standard comes before scale, right? I mean, isn't that sort of the chief concern? It's hard to scale. It's hard to scale unless you've standardized something, right?
Actually, the scale word has two meanings in this case. I think scale in terms of number of models that you can deploy and the variety of things that you can work with is one aspect, but the scale in terms of can it work with large amounts of data? Can it meet the latency requirements at that scale? I mean, those are that they work against each other in some sense, right? You want to standardize so that you can have many, but you also have to make sure that it works in those cases at the scale at which it's supposed to work, and those things trade off against each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would second what Andrew is saying on data, right? I think the key thing that machine learning systems differ from software systems is their dependency on data, right? So you learn from data, the data changes, the data is dirty, the data gets messy, you have to figure out how to understand data coming from different systems and make it work in the context of the machine learning models that you are working. So I think the data standardization, I think, is a big area for us in terms of especially in the enterprise business, where we work with many different kinds of customers, where they have different channels, different customer profiles, different use cases on which they're applying machine learning AI. So as part of that, we are working with Microsoft on this thing called the Open Data Initiative, where we are coming up with a standardized data model, which is the one data model. I mean, we are contributing our part, which is the experience data model about data around experiences, customer experiences. But there is SAP and there's Microsoft who are also contributing their aspect of it to come up with a model for data representation so that it can be used by a large number of enterprises. Once the data comes in and it's mapped to this data model, it can be used by an ecosystem of partners for that brand or that company who wants to leverage it for different kinds of applications beyond what we are providing as a vendor to them. So,
yeah, it's great. So one thing I want to make sure we get to, because this has come up a couple of times, and as we talk, it's really interesting that the two of you specifically are on this panel, because there's a big difference in creating AI or AI-empowered solutions for your own company, right? Essentially building a tool that your company can use to do something, and creating something that's consumer-facing, essentially a product, right? And you guys actually can sort of speak to those two things, right? I think it'd be really instructive for this crowd, especially people who are really looking for solutions for their businesses, understand that difference, that bifurcation between building something for internal use and building something that's going to be external.
Yeah, so from Airbnb side, we're building primarily for our internal users. And so a lot of the ML use cases are for the employees to start imbuing into the different businesses and different products of Airbnb. And the things about it that I think differ from more of an enterprise solution is, as we solve problems such as like GDPR and different security type concerns, we're solving it for ourselves, while B2C, you can imagine that you need to find a solution that works for a whole suite of businesses across many different verticals that could have different compliance challenges across healthcare, finance, all throughout. And so some of those challenges we get to definitely bypass a little bit, because the complexity is a little bit easier when you're doing it solely within Airbnb. And then the niceties with it is that we can actually pursue a lot of advanced ML use cases, because we thoroughly understand at least how specific how Airbnb business works, right? And so because we have this foundational understanding of Airbnb, we can now do more of these fine-tuned models to help Airbnb as a business out, because we understand all the challenges. We understand the taxonomy of the data. We understand just how the operations work within Airbnb. I imagine that could be a little bit more challenging when you're doing it for a suite of different enterprises that span across different verticals and have different types of use cases at different scales, at different types of data. So internally for us, we find that we can pursue a lot of interesting and very specific use cases for Airbnb, and probably the complexity of problems might be very different as well.
Yeah, at Adobe, we have sort of an advantage in terms of we get to work with both sides, right? So we have a consumer business with Photoshop and Acrobat, where we are using machine learning AI in terms of creating internal solutions to directly empower our internal users to deliver experiences, the right kind of experiences to our consumers. But we also have a big B2B, which is we're selling to brands products which help them run their digital marketing and advertising, their creation of experiences on apps, emails, websites, social media. So we get to build it in the context of customer zero. We call our internal customer zero.
Sure.
And then we get to build it out so that we can make it work for other brands who are customers as well. And the challenges change, right? So it's good to sort of iron out the challenges of building a working machine learning model for your own business. But then when you take it out to enterprises, which can range from a retailer to financial services to telecom to a whole bunch of sectors, you have to then figure out, okay, this is my data model that I was comfortable with, but now to make this data model work for all these different channels, all these different brands, all these different use cases for these customers, how do you sort of abstract it out in a way which you can reuse the model, reuse the featureization, reuse the things. Then there is the whole challenge around multi-tenancy. When I say multi-tenancy, it's not just having different models, but the same code can be used on different data sets for different customers to build different models, and managing that in a multi-tenant environment is the other challenge that we have to figure out how to keep the versions, while keeping the pipelines and while keeping the algorithms similar. How do you sort of make it work and make it work effectively for these different data sets and for these different experiences? So.
Yeah, so we're going to get to questions in just a second, but I wanted to follow up really quickly with something you said about the notion of customer zero.
Yeah.
Essentially, it sounds like you're basically sandboxing your own products internally before you. So that's sort of a both-and situation, right?
Yes.
Was that very much on purpose, or did that just sort of emerge as you guys were just trying to figure out how to make this technology work?
Yeah, no, I think so. It's both. I think as I said, we have been doing machine learning AI for a long time in our different products. I think as we started seeing the development of these new things, we wanted to have a point of view on how we take these new technologies that are emerging on the big data side, on the machine learning side, and apply it for our use case. And so we had a ready test bed in some sense of our own customers' data and our own customers' use cases that we could solve it with. And that was a starting point from which we could then say that, okay, now we are comfortable using these technologies, using it to solve these specific use cases. Can we offer it in a way which can be now productized and made available to a larger group of brands, right?
So you're essentially taking a thing and adapting it. So instead of having to build from scratch for a customer, you've got something that maybe needs to be adapted, but is most of the way there. So we have a few minutes left. We'd be happy to take a few questions. If anyone has a couple questions.
This is for either of you. I'd love to hear about a true example of something that was big and ugly and messy, and what you guys learned from it.
So the question is basically, if you have an example of something that was very, very difficult, big and messy, those are great words, how you solved it and what you learned from that.
So the example I could think of is, I alluded to it a little bit early on, where we've had a version of what we've built for the company before, and it was kind of this free-form system where individuals can build their own models and do what they like, and we allowed full control to the individuals. So complete, no standardization, just free for all. And this turns out very messy because essentially not all individuals are experts in the infrastructure side, which means that if we're not standardizing the infrastructure or the machine learning, you start to see the gaps where individuals are starting to do what they want on top of these computers, and they're running what they want, and the gaps in terms of what they're doing starts hitting them because they haven't built a system for a standardized system for maintaining this high availability, the latency requirements, the speed that's required to do uptime for business use cases. And so this is where we really needed to sit down as a team and really think, how do we up-level this and start standardizing? Because we're really missing the bar where there are certain things that our team does that we can standardize throughout the company, and it's really, we can't have individuals all try to solve the same problem, especially because the skill set is very specific and domain specific. And so I'd say that this was a huge learning experience for us. And with any type of ML work or kind of technology work, with these type of mistakes, you're looking at a pretty costly migration or deprecation, which happens throughout all businesses and all companies. And it's unfortunately, it's one of the costs of doing business, where as you commit to something and then you decide you have to change it, you need to now figure out how you can do a 180 and how you can adjust your strategy, which is always very difficult.
Yeah, so for us, the big challenge has been in transforming ourselves into a platform, right? So if you think about the products that we had, we were creating AI ML for the practitioners, so the person who's sending out the email or designing the website or advertising, right? And so it was tied to a very specific data set that we were collecting, very specific UI workflow that we were making the practitioner go through. But as this big data thing has evolved, where customers are saying that, hey, we are no longer looking at you to do it in a siloed fashion. We don't want you to just optimize advertising with just advertising data. We want you to use this new data assets that we are collecting on the website or from the mobile apps or from our CRM databases. We need you to bring this together and use it for making more effective advertising decisions. I'm just giving an example, right? So how do you convert this model of experience creation that is based on very standardized data sets to a generalized data sets? How do you run machine learning models where people can bring their own data into the mix and use it for predicting what a customer is likely to do or what is an effective ad to show to a person, right? And then the third part of it is not just enabling them to use our machine learning in the context of new data that they bring, but also allowing them to do their own machine learning. So as we see people coming up with citizen data scientists or people who in their organization they are hiring who are willing to spend the effort working on their data and have the domain expertise or at least the expertise in the context of the business in terms of how to use the data. How do we enable them to take their data assets and still work with our advertising or personalization or the experience delivery systems that we have, right? So that was sort of the big transformation that we had to do in the context of what we did in machine learning AI.
Great question. That was on my list too. I was worried we ran out of time. I'm glad someone got that. I think we have time for one more very quick question. Yeah.
For the gentleman from Adobe, how do you think about within your AI stack, which pieces you're going to build and own the IP, for instance, with Sensei, versus partner with some of the other bigger providers that could be competitors in certain situations?
Yeah, so I think we are not a general purpose AI machine learning place, right? We are not like Microsoft or Google or Amazon in terms of we don't want to do everything to self-driving cars or whatever. We are in the business of understanding experiences, designing experiences, delivering experiences. So our ML AI efforts are focused on those areas where we can influence the product set and the customers that use our product set by empowering them with machine learning AI-based tools. So in that sense, we are open to using. We use a lot of open source. We partner with Microsoft on a whole bunch of things. We also work with other vendors in terms of how we leverage a bunch of things. So we are not wedded to many of these frameworks or things. We use what is right for ensuring that we can help our customers design, deliver, and understand experiences for their end consumers.
Great. Thank you guys so much, Andrew and Anil. Appreciate all your insight here, and thank you for the questions. There's one more panel here. I'm not sure if it's a panel session, but there's one more thing here next, and there's a few more floating around the rest of the stages. So thank you both for being here, and thank you all for being here as well.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.